Now, speaking of socialist state, right? This is a theory suggested by Karl Marx. Karl Marx and he had a friend, Friedrich Engels, right? Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels suggested this idea of communism through his book of the Communist Manifesto. That's one book. Later on, he wrote another book called Das Kapital. Okay. Anyways, it was initially provided by the Communist Manifesto. Okay. Now, socialism is about fairness. Okay. Because we had liberalism in our world, that we are familiar with liberalism. So we saw in liberalism there is a problem. Like when you say that people have the freedom to earn as much as they can, some people earn more, some people earn less. And people who earn more keep earning and earning and earning, while people who earn less are going to keep struggling and struggling and struggling, which is sort of what's happening in online education. Online education is similar to capitalism, right? People who are studious are making most out of it. They don't have to travel for classes. They save time with that. They have access to recordings of classes, right? Don't have to take photocopies of notes, soft copies and all that. So people who are studious are like racing away with their marks, while the non-studious ones are keep struggling, right? So this is how capitalism works. Rich people keep earning more and more, while poor people are struggling on a daily basis. So people always talked about how bad this is, how unfair the liberal system is sometimes, capitalism is sometimes. So because of that, people started talking about fairness. Okay, fairness. What is fair? What is right and what is wrong? However, people who talked about fairness back in the day, before Karl Marx, they had a problem. Whatever they came up with weren't very practical. That was the issue. Whatever they came up weren't very practical. Okay. So in other words, you see, they simply had a lot of complaints, right? They simply had a lot of complaints. Now, you see, one of the, what do you call it? One of the criticisms feminism has is the fact that it is just a bunch of complaints, right? There is a criticism like that. Feminism is just about like complaining. Women has to go through this, women have to go through that. They don't necessarily provide why women became like this, what are the reasons, and what is the solution to this problem, right? It is just like a bunch of complaints. That is a criticism against feminism. Socialism had the same problem. All the socialists back in the day simply talked about how unfair the system is, but no one properly explained. So because of that, we call these guys utopian socialists. We'll be studying this in Unit 5 in detail, right? Later on, Karl Marx came and he came up with a very organized version of socialism, right? So in that, he pointed out how we came to this unfair system and how the unfairness happens and what is the solution. So because of that, Karl Marx is known as a scientific socialist. Okay. So these three terms, socialism, Marxism, and communism, comes like this. Now, everyone who talked about a fair society belongs to socialism. When you say socialism, it's a big picture, the big circle, where you talk about everyone. Everyone who talked about fairness in the world, fairness in the society is a socialist. Anyone who wanted to create a fair society is known as a socialist, right? Out of that socialist big circle, you have Karl Marx standing up, coming up with a really good organized version of socialism, which was initially known as communism, right? Later on, after Karl Marx, there were many people adding things to communism, and communism became a more bigger, vast theory. And people had to identify what Karl Marx originally said. Then they started saying, okay, whatever Karl Marx originally said as Marxism and whatever that developed by others, communism, and the entire circle is socialism. Okay, now imagine something like this. Imagine something like, okay, think about Okay, let's take Dhyani, right? Dhyani lives in Rajagiri. Okay, so the entire city of Rajagiri is like socialism. It's like a city full of people who want fairness. But one day Dhyani came up with a very organized version of fairness. So people started recognizing Dhyani's house inside Rajagiri. So Dhyani's house is like that one standard socialism, right? So you start calling that communism. Communism, okay? Where Dhyani lives. Now replace Dhyani with Karl Marx, okay? Then the example works, okay? So later on, we can see that Dhyani's houses added new rooms, new territory, and now it has turned into a bigger house. Okay. Now the entire thing is communism. You have to understand what Dhyani originally put, and you start calling that Marxism. Understand? Socialism is the entire thing, and communism is like one specific theory brought out by Karl Marx inside that. And that was later expanded. Once it was expanded, people had to recognize what was originally said by Karl Marx and what was later developed. So people started calling what was later developed communism and what originally mentioned by Karl Marx as Marxism. Understand, right? So anyway, speaking of Marxism, Karl Marx divides the society into 6 different eras. Okay. Now, what do you have to do? What was lacking in the previous theories? What was lacking in the previous theories was they never mentioned how this problem occurred. Okay. Secondly, they never mentioned how it is happening right now. Okay. Thirdly, they never mentioned the solution. So Karl Marx gave a proper solution to this problem. Karl Marx said, okay, I will explain the existence of humans in 6 different social stages. How does that work? Karl Marx goes way back to where things started off. Okay. If you remember the 6 social eras, the first social era was primitive communist era. He's talking about the time where humans existed in caves, right? In caves, caveman time. So he said this caveman time was a very nice time, fair time, okay? Because people living in caves, there weren't rich people, poor people, powerful people, presidents or citizens, police officers, nothing was there. Every human was the same. Every human had the same level of resources, same level of life, right? Everyone had the same responsibilities. Every man had to go out and hunt animals, while every woman had to stay home, stay in the cave and take care of the children. Okay. So Karl Marx identifies this as a fair system, a fair system. So which is why he calls it primitive communist era. So according to Karl Marx, communist is the word that they refer to a fair system. So initial stage of Karl Marx, according to Karl Marx, primitive communist era, everything was equal. Then with people inventing weapons, equipment, because they discovered metal. They discovered metal. Metal again, not the rock music metal, the metal, the thing, the metal, loha metal, right? The solid object metal. They discovered iron, copper, and all that. Then what happened? Then people started using these metal to build weapons, right? To build weapons, to build equipment, right? After that, what happened was that people started producing more food. Understand? People started producing more food. Now, think about the people who went hunting. People who went hunting, back in the day, they had to throw stones and they had to dig all these traps and all those, like use logs and all that to kill animals. And back in the day, the animals were like mammoths and all, right? You guys know a fun fact: when Egyptian pyramids were built, mammoths existed on Earth at the same time. There were mammoths existing on Earth. while Egyptians are making pyramids. Okay. So I recently read an article about how history overlaps. It also says that when Star Wars was premiering in Los Angeles, France was still using the guillotine to execute criminals in 1977. Also, there was someone who came for a television interview in 1955. He was like 102 years old at the time, right? 1955, he came for a television interview, and he was in the same theater when Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. Right? Crazily interesting stuff. Okay. Anyways, so mammoths existed at the time. Okay, so not the easiest animal to hunt down, and they didn't have like any equipment or weapon at the time. This is when they introduced and they created all these weapons and stuff, right? They started creating weapons and stuff using metal. With that, we can see people started hunting down more animals. So now we have a bigger food production. Okay. So back in the day, whatever the food people produced, it was enough for consumption. You have your dinner, then you are done for the day. Okay. But now, with more food being produced, after the consumption is done, you have a remainder left. So some people had bigger remainders, some people had smaller remainders. Now you have rich and poor based on that. For the first time, there is a difference called rich and poor, stronger and weaker. Why? Because if you have more food, you don't have to go hunting the next day. There are some people who have a remainder big enough. They don't have to go hunting for 2 weeks. There are other people, they don't have to go hunting for 5 days. There are some people who don't have much. They have to go hunting 2 days later. This created a difference between rich and poor for the first time. So not only individuals, some tribes, as we learned tribal state, right? Some tribes started being more powerful. Why? Now imagine there is one tribe, they have enough food for 2 months, they don't have to go hunting. Okay, you have hunted down more animals. If you are like cultivating, you cultivated a bigger area now because now you have equipment, right? Now you have more grains, more food, more vegetables. You don't have to go making food, doing agriculture, hunting off now. Okay, well, for a while. While there can be another tribe that they have to go hunting the next day. Then what happens is that one tribe who doesn't have to go hunting the next month, what will they be doing for that 1 month? They start training weapons. They start training all these sword fights and all that, right? And with that, they become more capable of fighting wars. Okay. So with that, we can see those tribes who didn't have the opportunity to go out and practice like war and all that, they become weaker. Okay, so I think you can see what comes next. The stronger tribes came and invaded the weaker tribes and captured the weaker tribes and made them their slaves. Okay, then starts the second social era, the slave era. Okay.
So basically, primitive communist society is the problem for all.
What do you mean?
Wait, what?
Why would you say
No,
that?
like, I'm saying, why? Isn't that?
No, like communist society was all fine because everyone was equal, right? But the problem was with equipment coming, some people became more powerful. Some tribes became more powerful, which ended the communist society and which created the slave society. So slave society means that richer tribes enslave the poorer tribes. Stronger tribes enslave the poorest tribes, right? Then started this system where some people don't do the work and they get everything, while the slaves have to do everything and they get nothing. this created the system where like the slave owners don't do anything. Slave owners don't do any work. They just chill, right? Majority of the people are slaves. They have to do all the cultivation work and household work and everything, and they don't get anything in return. They just get their food, right? Whereas the slave owners own everything. And that system was started. That system was started with this. Understand? That system was started with slave society. Then the slave owners realized they need something to keep this unfair system going. Then they created an instrument. What is that instrument? The state. The state was created by slave owners so they can suppress the slaves and get that work done. And that's how the state was created, which is why Karl Marx believes the pre-state was like a happy place. Post-state was where everything became bad because state was created to suppress the slaves, right? Then after a while, we came to the third era, feudalist era. In feudalist era, the same system continued. But now you don't have slaves and slave owners. Instead, you have aristocrats and peasants. Aristocrats are the ones who are coming from like a better bloodline and all that, right? So they'll be like, okay, I am the sheriff of Nottingham, right? I am the Earl of Locksley. I am the sheriff of Birmingham, right? So you have this one family that says that they are from like a better bloodline, better family. So because of that, they own all the land everywhere. Whereas the peasants who are coming from like normal bloodlines, common bloodlines, they have to work in these farms, they have to work in these paddy fields, they have to work in all these agricultural work or do the hunting or whatever and give all the production to the aristocrat. So you can see it's again the slave system, but it just, you don't call them slaves anymore. Because during the slavery time, slaves weren't even considered human, right? Slaves were considered property. But at this time, you consider them human, but like not very valued humans because they are coming from a smaller bloodline. Okay. So that's what the medieval time is about. Then came the capitalistic time where we are today. Okay. And today also it's the same system being continued. Because the rich people, they own all the companies, they don't do any work. Whereas the middle class people and the lower class people have to go and we have to do an 8 to 5 job. And we have to work so they can make the profit, right? So can you imagine the money that goes in for Food City every day or Cargill's? You just walk in, you just take like a couple of snacks, the bill comes down to like 300, 400 rupees. Can you imagine how many people spend money like that, right? So once that happens, okay, once that happens, do you think people who work in the Food City get all that money? No, it goes to the company. The company owner. What is the duty of the company owner? Nothing. He just has to just stay there and take all the money. People are doing their job, right? People are doing their jobs and they have to do a job on a daily basis just so they can keep their lives running. Can you imagine that? Let's say I am working for Food City. Let's say they take me as a manager. So if that Food City makes like 35 million rupees a month, let's say I increase the sales to 40 million. That means the Food City owner takes extra 5 million rupees coming from my branch. And for my 150,000 salary, he'll give me a salary hike, 175,000. So he gave me a 25,000 hike because I made him 5 million rupees extra. That's how capitalism works, right? So Karl Marx says, again, we are back in the system where the minority of the people, the rich people, they don't do any work, but they take all the profit, while the working class have to work. He doesn't use the word middle class, lower class. He says, it doesn't matter whether you are sweeping the roads or like working as a manager, it just you get to wear a tie and you get like a slightly higher salary and you consider yourself to be higher than that. But after all of you all are working just to keep your daily life going, right? Daily life means just we have our groceries, we can buy our groceries, we can buy like a normal vehicle, we can go on a trip once or twice, we can provide for our children's education. That's all, right? Whereas the other people, like when they are getting money, right, they can like do stuff like buying an entire apartment complex or like, buying a helicopter and those things, right? The level of money they get. All these influencers you have on Instagram, influencers like travel bloggers, what they do is, of course, they belong to that particular part where they don't have to do any actual work. They get the money coming in, right? So all they do is travel. They just travel and travel and travel. Whereas we have to save up an entire year so we can go on one trip 1 year, right? Because we are from the working class. Whereas for a living, they travel. For a living, in the sense, they're just spending money. They have enough money in their accounts. And that's how it works. They don't do any actual work, but they get the profit. Just like it happened in the socialist system. So that's how it happened in the slavery system, which is why Karl Marx says it is the same system that has been going on. Slave society, slaves versus slave owners. Feudalist society, peasants versus aristocrats. Capitalist society, working class versus the rich class. It has always been like the majority of the people doing the work so that the minority on top can take profit off of it without doing any work. And they have been using this instrument of state to keep this unfair system running. Okay. So Marx says that we have been going this way so far, and at the moment, which is why we are suffering, which is why we are still suffering. And Karl Marx says, at this time, this capitalistic society comes to an end. People say, okay, you know what? Enough is enough. Now we are standing up. So what they do is, working class stands up through a working class revolution, and they take that instrument of state to their hand. They take that instrument to their hand. Give us the state. And they use the state to create a classless society, right? Classless society is where, when did we have a classless society? In the primitive communist era. That's when every human was equal. Okay. After that, it has always been a class struggle. Slave society, feudalist, capitalist, all the time. But it doesn't happen overnight, right? It doesn't really happen overnight. It happens in a systematic way. There is a path you have to take to achieve that. That's why you have the socialist state, which is like a bridge that connects us to that final goal that we want, which is the classless society, right? Socialist society is where the state does exist. Okay, the state does exist, but it exists in the hands of the working class this time. All this time it existed in the oppressive class, right, who oppress others. But now state exists in the working class hand. They use this state, the very same instrument that was used against them all this time. Now they are using it for a better purpose. What is the purpose?
Yes. I have a question regarding this whole capitalism thing. Do you know AOC? Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, USA Congresswoman. She's very loud about tax the rich.
Okay, yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
What do you think about her methods, her views on?
Well, she's more likely using that to social democratic side. That means that she's not entirely denying the capitalistic system, but she suggests like bringing in reforms, right? So we have a lesson dedicated to whatever she's believing in, which is social democracy. That's there in the 5th unit, right? That means you don't entirely get rid of the capitalistic system. You just bring reforms to minimize this unfairness, right? So, but what Karl Marx suggests is not that, right? Karl Marx is suggesting, no, that you can't fix this with reforms. There's only one way to fix this. That's by standing up, taking the state instrument to your hand and using that for a better purpose. What is the better purpose they use? They create a classless society, step by step. First of all, what they do is they take control of the state and they make sure that you have a one-party system. You create a public property system where the property is owned by the public, right? In a socialist country, the property can't be owned by one person. Okay. Now, these bus holes and stuff belong to everyone, right? And what about people who live in quarters? The police officers who live in police quarters, right? That you get for a temporary time, that's government property, right? You just get to live there for a period of time. So in a socialist country, that's how it works. You don't own your house. It's not yours. It is owned by the public. It is owned by the state. They just give you the house so you can live it. That way they make sure everyone gets the same size of house, everyone gets the same vehicle, everyone gets the same salary. Doctor, garbage truck driver, teacher, president, everyone gets the same amount of salary, right? Every school is given same resources. They are creating an absolute equality. Okay.
I have a question.
The country is divided equally among people. Okay, Pandit, what's up, Pandit?
Yeah, sir, in China, can you own a house or are all houses owned by the state?
Okay, China is not entirely communist, right? They have capitalistic features also. In China, what works is they have cities. This Shanghai, Shenzhen, Guangzhou, Beijing, those cities, they follow capitalism. Rest of the country, they follow socialism. So the property is owned by the state. Those cities, they have allowed capitalism, so the money would come into the country. So they function normally. They have film halls and all that. Right? Okay, so this is what Karl Marx said. You have to go into. Yes, yeah, ask.
Like some other day when we are free, let's talk about the one-child policy China had before.
Yeah, so that's of course because they wanted to control the population, because the population was like a little uncontrollable in China, right? So then Karl Marx says, when you follow something like this, when you use the instrument of state for something good, and when you like put force into creating an equal society again, at one point that class difference is going to dry out. There won't be a class difference. There will be an absolute equal system. There will be a system where every human gets to do their job, but they get the same salary. Everyone's doing a job, right? The person who sweeps the road, and the person who's running the country as a president, and the person who's a manager, and the person who drives a garbage truck, and the person who teaches, and the person who's an engineer who's building a bridge, or who's a doctor who's giving medicine. Everyone's doing a job, right? And everyone should get an equal salary for doing their job. And finally, once they create that, that means we are back to where we were in caveman days. No rich people, no poor people, no powerful people, no weak people. Everybody does their job and they get an equal salary for that. Everyone's equal. Hence, we have the advanced communist system. It is advanced communist because we don't live in caves anymore. We have the civilization, right? So it is advanced, but it is communist. Primitive communist means it was communist, but it was primitive. We were living in caves and we were very primary as humans. Okay. Advanced communist is also known as future communist, right? So world has not reached the sixth stage at all, right? World has only reached the fifth. The Soviet Union, China, all of them went to the fifth one, Socialist State.
Not reached in the sense?
No,
we haven't like
the advanced communist society, the last stage we are talking about, people being absolutely equal, it was never reached.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
One was the fifth one. Soviet Union, China, Cuba, they went to the fifth one. It didn't go to the sixth one. But if you go to the sixth one, hypothetically, you don't need a state anymore. Right? According to Karl Marx, state is an oppressive organization, right? And they kept state because they wanted to make sure that a proper society is fixed. They use the very same instrument that suppressed them to create a better system. Okay. So after when we go to the advanced communist era, the state is not necessary anymore. Right? The state is not necessary anymore because finally we created that classless society and the communist society we used to have back then in the primitive communist era. So the state withers away, according to Karl Marx. It's called state withering away. It just vanishes in thin air. State just goes away, fades away, right? That's called withering of the state. All right. Okay. Let's see. I have a couple of questions in the chat. Could one say that the struggles of the Black Lives Matter movement speaks of his keen struggle of the Marxists first? Well, not exactly. Black Lives Matter is sort of like, it's about racism, right? It's not exactly about the rich people suppressing poor people. This is a different side. They're talking about racism in Black Lives Matter. but the management gets a majority of the distribution wealth because they invest the capital. And yes, so this is the argument brought up by anti-communists, right? They say that it is fair that the company owners getting the profit because they are the ones who take a risk by establishing a company, bringing in the factories, bringing in the equipment, putting in the capital, and like they take the risk. People who work machines, if the company goes bankrupt, they don't get like a loss. The loss is for the person who invested. So which is why capitalistic people put that argument forward saying, no, they deserve to get all the profit because they took a risk by opening the company. But from a Marxist perspective, he says, no, like it is the workers who put in all the work. So it is unfair that the company owners taking all the profit. Yeah, so you have included that. This is the justification most capitalists offer, right? Yes. How justifiable it is in your opinion? Well, it is, there are two sides to look at it. That's how political science works, right? So there are two sides to look at it. It makes some sense, but I feel like it goes a little too far, right? They say it is justified for them to take all the profit because they were the ones who invested the money, but they take all of it and they give like a really little amount of money to the workers, and that's a little unfair. Bernie Sanders is actually more inclined with socialism. Yes, Bernie Sanders is one of the people who ran in the US presidential election, and he's very much connected to socialism. But then again, doesn't that tie into anarchism? Yeah, so not having a state, one can say it can create an anarchy, but Karl Marx doesn't think that, because Karl Marx says before state came, when we used to live in caves, everything was fine. There was no violence and all that, right? So Karl Marx doesn't believe in anarchy. He says the state should not be there, and his motive is to get rid of state. So is Cuba still a socialist state? It is, but none of the socialist countries in the world don't exactly follow socialism, just like Karl Marx said. There are differences. So even in Cuba, there are some differences. But yes, mostly we can say it's a socialist state. But the Black Lives Matter do speak about social equality as well, right? Is it because it creates social equality such that anarchy would be prevented? Black Lives Matter talks about social equality, but from racist point of view. They're talking about treating all the races equally. Karl Marx is not about race. Karl Marx also talks about money factor, right? Black Lives Matter has nothing to do with money. It's about like whether you are rich or poor, black people are looked down, right? So it's the racism factor we are looking at here in Karl Marx, in Black Lives Matter. Karl Marx also talks about the money factor. Karl Marx doesn't talk about race. He says like whatever the color you are, as long as you are a poor person, you're a working class person, that you've been suppressed by the rich people. That's what they're talking about. Okay. Right. Sharon, please put the... Yes, yes.
One more thing.
Ask.
So like the best option we have right now is a very safe middle between capitalism and socialism. Do you think that would, do something better than either of the extremities?
There was someone called Edward Bernstein who came up with an idea called social democracy. That means you take the good sides, good features of liberalism, liberal democracy, and the good features of socialism. It's called social democracy, right? That is there in the 5th unit as an ideology to study, which means that you follow the liberal capitalistic system where you have free and fair elections and all that. But at the same time, you don't just go ahead with just like raw capitalism, letting people, suffer from poverty and all that. They do all the welfare activities. Okay, so that will be there in 5th unit. We'll be studying that. Sir is... Right. North Korea, yes. In North Korea, although they call itself socialism, they are not socialists. North Korea is a fascist country. They just call themselves socialists. Is a universal basic income a trait of... Yes, because they talk about like the states getting rid of, like, the states being... When the states are not there anymore, the entire globe is going to be one communist society where there is no class struggle and everyone's equal, and there is no state, right? So which means the entire globe is going to be like functioning as one, and it is like a global way of global income and global expense, right? The entire humankind working as one. Right, okay, Sharon, please put the note back up.
So when you learn at a stretch, it's like brainwashing. Like it makes sense, and you're like, does it make sense because I'm learning so much of it?
Well, no, like here's the thing: you talk to Karl Marx, and whatever Karl Marx says may sound ridiculous to you in the beginning, right? Like you ask him whatever you ask him about feminism, you ask him about religion, you ask him about civil society, whatever you ask him, he's like, okay, it's a trick played by the rich people. You like whatever you ask, like there's a lot of memes about that. Whatever you ask Karl Marx, he says, okay, it's rich people trying to trick you. Okay. But then again, when he explains it, it makes sense. That's a weird part of it, right?
Sir,
Yeah, ask.
what does Karl Marx have say about religion? I would love to know.
Okay, again, that is there in the fifth unit. It is there in the fifth unit, under secularism, right? I can see fifth unit will be very interesting with you all. Karl Marx says religion is a trick played by the rich people to distract you all from the unfairness of the society, right?
Okay, I kind of agree with that.
Okay, Rakib, yes. Yeah.
So do you think Karl Marx is like well ahead of his time?
He actually was, right? But mostly like, this is because like when you watch his life story and all that, he struggled a lot because of like classic liberalism. And it was mostly like,
I mean like
yeah, he was
most
like,
of his
which is why we consider Karl Marx as one of the three modern most brainiest people. Okay, Sharon, you can stop the screen share for a second. There's an interesting fact. I would like to do a quick quiz competition with you all. Is there anyone who can name the three smartest people, the three brainiest people in modern times? The three brainiest people in ancient times.
I think I answered this before in class.
Three of them,
I didn't know the answer.
Back in the day, in ancient times, all three of them were Greek: Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. Right? Modern times, who are the three greatest brains humankind has seen?
Karl Marx, Sigmund Freud, and I can't remember the other one.
All three of them are Jewish, by the way.
Oh. So there's this thing that the reason Hitler was hell-bent on, destroying Jewish people was because
you can say Hitler's kind of brainy though.
What? Hitler?
No, I meant
Hitler's kind of brainy though.
Hitler's not Jewish, is he? He's not, right? I'm saying.
No, I'm saying.
I'm saying some people have this opinion that the reason Hitler went haywire with destroying Jewish people was because they're really brainy.
That was one. And he hated socialism because Karl Marx was Jewish. But like the whole Jewish, anti-Jewish propaganda was sort of like the Islamophobia we have currently, right? People having a lot of hatred on Muslims at the current world. At that time in Europe, it was against the Jewish people, right? Like you see, how Muslim people are very successful with businesses and stuff, right? And people and them being very religious and like and all that, which sort of freaks people out into thinking they are going to take over the world and all that. That's a whole hatred against the Muslims, right? Saying they're taking over the world. So at the time in Europe, it was against the Jewish people because they were very successful in businesses and they were brainy and like them. Now, when it comes to the Muslims and the Jewish community both, the thing is, even when they are a minority, they are very significant, right? Because they are very hardworking. Okay? Except you, Rakib, right? Muslim students in my class are like very, very determined. You see how Sarah and Hishma and them like, scoring well. Again, coming back to that, right? They are very hardworking. Okay? So because of that, they have a lot of achievements. And of course, in the business world, you can see that they are very good in handling the businesses, right? They have good brains. So because of that, people tend to create a phobia on them, thinking, okay, these people have so much control. Even when they are a community, they are so significant that people sort of end up getting like freaked out on them, right? Thinking that they are going to take over the country, they're going to take over the world. But the same thing applied with the Jewish people because they were so significant. Being a minority, they were so significant in the world. Even at the moment, it's less than 1% of the people in the world who are Jewish at the moment. But you can see how influential they are, like, how successful they are in Israel and all that. So it was the same problem in Germany and all that. The Jewish minority was very successful in terms of business and all that, which is why they sort of went against the Jewish community. Okay. Anyways, the three biggest brains we've had in the recent history, right? I'm surprised, Dhyani, you came up with Karl Marx and Sigmund Freud, because Freud is the name that people normally forget. They come up with the
I
other.
forgot the other one.
It's Karl Marx, Sigmund Freud, and Albert Einstein. Right? People normally say Karl Marx and Albert Einstein, they forget Sigmund Freud. But yeah, so those three are known as the people who were way ahead of their times.
So I can't forget Freud and live in this house. They'll chase me out.
Of course, I understand. It's like a family thing. You're coming from a psychology background, right? Yeah. Okay, right. Sharon, now you can share the note. Right. Okay, please scroll up. Right, Raki, please read the note, and now this note should make sense to you now that I've explained everything to you. Wait. Socialist State. Yes.
Socialist State. Socialism was suggested as an alternative option to capitalist state. Capitalistic and liberalistic system, although the idea of socialism has existed in the world for a long time. This was politically organized by Karl Marx with concept of communism, in brackets Marxism. This was developed as a political concept during the 19th century after the books Das Kapital and Communist Manifesto by Karl Marx. However, this was developed as a form of state in the 20th century following Russian Revolution and the formation of Soviet Union. Marxists identify several stages of social evolution. They are primitive communist state, slave society, feudalist state, capitalist state, socialist state, advanced communist state, society. Therefore, socialist state exists between capitalistic society and advanced communist society. The socialist state established after the fall of capitalistic state. The capitalistic system is toppled by the labor class through an organized revolution. The main motive of socialist state is to create a system where the country, politics, and society are managed to achieve a classless equality. Main features of socialist systems are the poor class of the society becoming owners of the state power. The foundation of political system is dominance of poor instead of liberal democracy. The state has dedicated themselves to assure quality and standards for every citizen in basic requirements such as education, housing, employment, health, etc. The economic equality being valued over political freedom, therefore, the freedom to have a political opinion or to criticize the government is compromised as to assure equal economic privileges to everyone. This means the socialist state prioritizes economic equality over political rights. Private entrepreneur is not allowed as the state controls every wing of the government, including production, distribution, exchange, etc. Since having different political options, it is not allowed. A competitive political party does not exist. A socialist system, one-party system, which is the Communist Party of the country. Although state exists in a socialist system, the socialists do not recognize the state as an essential political organization. According to socialists, the state is an instrument created by the rich class to suppress the poor majority. As socialists believe in the state was created as a result of the class struggle, therefore the poor class uses the instrument of state to attack the class struggle itself. Hence, once an equal society is found, the necessity of a state is no more, and the political institute of state is fading away of state. The socialist system a socialist state system that is based on these fundamentals was applied and attempted by countries such as Russia, Cuba, Vietnam, Cambodia, North Korea, etc. However, following the fall of the Soviet Union, the socialist theory was heavily criticized, and currently socialism is hardly considered as an alternative option for liberal democracy. Instead of it's mostly considered as a unique political concept itself. Done.
Right, okay. Then we have fascist state. Before that, does anyone have any questions? No, right? It should be clear to you now. Right. Then we have fascist state. Sharon, you can stop screen sharing for a second. Okay. So now we have fascist state. Fascism is all about what? Fascism is all about autocracies or dictatorships. You guys know dictatorships, right? Like one person handling the entire thing or one party handling the entire thing, basically like a military rule or something like that. Now, every dictatorship is not fascist, but every fascist rule is a dictatorship. What does that mean? You can see that all Methoites are girls, but not all girls are Methoites, right? Like that. Every fascist state is a dictatorship, but not every dictatorship is a fascist state, because fascism has some unique features. Okay. So fascism means basically capturing the entire government at once and centralizing all the powers within one government and saying that this government has all the powers and basically you can't do anything about that, right? You have a government and they will do whatever that is best for the country, whatever that is best for the country. That's what they are going to do. Okay. So fascist country, right? In a fascist country, the government controls everything without leaving much for anyone else. In a fascist country, you can't disagree with your ruler. You can't disagree with your government. You can't make a new political party. You can't make a new political movement. You can't simply say no to anything that your government says. Okay. So in a fascist country, they do whatever that is best for the state. Okay. If you remember that basics class we did, for liberal democracy, we drew a circle and we drew an individual because they are doing what is best for the individual. In a socialist country, we drew like one circle and we drew a couple of people around that, saying that it's best for what's best for the community. Then for fascism, we drew a circle and we drew a national flag or like a state, right? That means that you do what's best for the state. If the state says, now that's what Hitler used for Jewish execution. Hitler said, our country will be great. What's best for the country at the moment is killing off all the Jewish people, and which is why they just went ahead with that. Okay, so in a fascist country, rights are not given to people. Basically, like imagine like having like a military command person as your school principal, right? Something like that. Right now, what's happening in Afghanistan, the Taliban is like, using all those extremist rules and all that, right? So with that, you can see that they are centralizing all the powers, and there are some features, some unique features in a fascist country. For example, they worship their leader. There is a cult of worshipping their leader. Now in North Korea recently, a mother was imprisoned because she saved her children when her house was on fire, and she didn't save the two portraits of the state leader and his father. So they're taking it that serious. They don't have religion in their countries. Instead, they worship their leader. Now in Germany, they used to worship Hitler. Okay. And there is no separation of powers. They were like, Parliament, go home. I am the legislature. Executive, go home. I am the executive. Judiciary, go home. I will handle justice. It's like that. Everything is centralized. Okay. And they use a lot of militarization. Everything is done according to the military. They don't believe in peace. They go for wars all the time. Okay. So fascism is not that hard to understand. You just have to think of like a dictatorship, right? And you just need to remember who came up with fascism. It was Benito Mussolini. Mussolini is the one who invented fascism, right? The question, lacking key constitutional principles such as concept of separation of powers and rule of law. Yes, this is the exact opposite of a democratic country. If you understand what a democratic country is, think of the exact opposite. They have now democratic countries think of equality, right? They say like irrespective of your race, irrespective of your gender, we are all same. That's what in a democratic country we believe in. But in a fascist country, we believe in, they believe in a fascist country that they say that men are greater than women, soldiers are greater than men, officers are greater than soldiers, and the leader is greater than the officers. So they have a hierarchy. They say women on bottom, then the men, then soldiers, then officers, then leader. Okay, and all that. Question. Didn't Hitler quite literally burn the Reichstag, the German parliament? Yes, he did burn down the Reichstag. Okay, but there was a plan behind that. He burned down the German parliament, which is known as the Reichstag, and then he blamed the Jewish people for doing that. Right, that was done to sort of like fuel the hatred against the Jewish people in Germany. Okay. Right, this is not that hard to understand. You guys will be able to figure out. There's no theoretical background behind fascism. It's not like socialism. There's no principles behind this. And so much so that fascism doesn't have any principle. There's no like teachings behind that. Okay. Then also, they don't exactly explain how the state was created. They don't explain how the state was evolved. They don't explain what is the structure of a fascist country. They don't explain how, they don't have a proper political or economic theory also. Now, liberalism is about having an open market. Socialism is about creating an equal property, public property system. In fascist countries, they just do things according to the situation. That's all. They just do whatever their leader does, right? And also another important thing is a fascist rule normally ends once their leader dies. Right? When the leader dies, the rest of the people don't really have a way of taking that forward, unless the person has a son. Like in North Korea, the son takes over like that, right? Normally, when the leader dies, that's sort of the end of it. Question, sir, will Afghanistan turn into a fascist state? Sort of like heading that way. But as I told you, not every dictatorship is a fascist country, right? Because fascism doesn't support the idea of a religion, but Afghanistan is sort of like religious extremism. Right? They are using religious principles and religion as a shield to justify whatever the decisions they make. But in fascist countries, they don't have a religion. They follow their leader. Their leader is the God to them. In Germany, back in the day, Hitler was God, literally God to them. Right?
The concept of fascism mainly supports the concept of a dictator. Therefore, the fascist theory creates a power-centralized rule with an autocratic or totalitarian government. Benito Mussolini is considered as the father of fascism, and Adolf Hitler is also important as a fascist leader. In basic political terminology, the term fascism is generally used to define dictatorship governments. Although it should be noted that not every dictatorship is fascism, as fascism has its own unique features. In another way of definition, fascism is an abnormal development of a capitalistic system, which means the rich class chooses fascism when it is not possible to continue capitalism inside democracy. Features of a fascist state are as follows. Considering state as a supreme, almighty organization, therefore no other power can go above or parallel to the state. In addition to the supremacy of the state, the supremacy of the nation is also emphasized. Therefore, Hitler points out that the state is the reflection of the nation. 3, the state is considered not as a social organization, rather an organization above the society. 4. Fascism does not provide an organized or detailed explanation for the origin, existence, and future of the state. 5. Fascism gives complete prominence to state, therefore the individual and the society are considered less important and meaningless. According to fascism, the task of the society and the individual is to support and contribute to the development of the state. Number 6, the leadership of the country is considered to be a divine figure in a fascist system. Therefore, the citizens embrace their leader as a figure of intelligence, philanthropy, bravery, patriotism, etc. Fascism points out that citizens should obey and worship such a great leader. Also, the media of a fascist country often uses propaganda to promote the character of the leader. 7. Citizens do not have the right to be organized inside a fascist system. Hence, formation of new political parties is not allowed in a fascist state. Fascism functions with a one-party system. For example, during Mussolini's reign, Italy only had the Fascist Party, while during Hitler's period, Germany only had the Nazi Party. Fascism rejects political participation of citizens. Therefore, the state is controlled on the discretion of the leader. This means that people are not allowed to take part in governance through elections or political expressions by any means. 9. The fascist state is based on force. Under this system, a fascist society is heavily militarized. In other words, fascism considers peace as a dream of cowards and believes in the policy of blood and iron. Therefore, peace and reconciliation are not considered as an option by fascists. War and is it worse than violence or war and violence?
War and violence.
Of war and violence. 10. Fascism has an invasive foreign policy where fascist countries invade other countries with the intention of building an empire. Therefore, fascism applies violence within as well as outside the state to maintain the fascist system. Groups with different political views are openly suppressed in a fascist system. 11. The fascist state is often associated with racism as they believe in the concept of a pure supreme race. For example, Hitler ran a mass Jew execution during his fascist reign. 12. Fascism believes in inequality.
Right. Any questions, guys? Anything? No, right? Okay. Then we can conclude.
So I wanted to ask,
Mhm.
if I do the 2020 and email it to you, would that be okay? Or should I send it on WhatsApp and you call me like that day and do the MCQ paper? And all that?
You send it to me, will you? Send it to me. I'll figure something out.
I haven't done it yet. I'll
Yeah,
send it to you.
yeah. Once you do it, send it to me. Mail it to me. Okay.